writers way over there. You heard from them one at a time a couple of hours ago, and they each spoke about their careers a little bit, and they each read some from their work. What we're going to do now for the next 30, 40 minutes is talk about a subject common to the three, which is Appalachian literature. I'm going to ask them some questions, let them talk among themselves as it develops, and then after about 20 minutes or so, we'll be looking for questions from the audience. Some of you I know have questions, and others of you will think some up as we go along. But we will have time for that. There wasn't time when they were doing their individual performances. We are sitting, I hope this doesn't sound negative, but at the tail end of Appalachia. If you go another 20 or 30 miles south, you'll fall off of Appalachia. But we're still in it, and these writers, these three, are in it. There is now a Center for Appalachian Literary Studies. It is understood as a coherent genre of American literature, fiction and poetry, and obviously nonfiction writing. But there are antecedents to this. Before there was a coherent a study called Appalachian literature, there were writers. Who do you think of, Silas, and so on? Who do you think of as your forebears? Who are the antecedents to your writing that you think people should know about?
Well, when I think of Appalachian literature, my first thing is my mind goes to James Steele, and I teach Appalachian literature, and I always teach his novel, River of Earth, and my students love that book. It's very readable. It's a page-turner. It's about a little boy. And his poetry's great. I love him. She's not really old enough for me to say she's a forebear, but Lee Smith is the person that brought me to Appalachian literature. So I always encourage everybody to read. I think Fair and Tender Ladies is one of the masterpieces of Appalachian, of American literature. Those are the first two that come to my mind.
Well, for me, my first major influence, the person that made me think, oh, I should write it. This is what you write about. I can write this. Was Eudora Welty, who's not Appalachian, but one of her parents was Appalachian, so she had that storytelling influence. And then, and Lee Smith. I was a student of Lee Smith, and I'd actually been kicked out of a writing class at UNC. This guy wrote on my first paper, you need to withdraw from this class, you're not ready. And I was crushed, and I was sitting in this cafeteria, and somebody came in and said, what's the matter with you? And I said, well, they told me I couldn't write. And she said, well, what do you want to write like? And I pulled out this book, Black Mountain Breakdown, and by Lee Smith, and I said, I want to write like this. I mean, these are my people. And she said, well, you should take her class. And I was so off the turnip truck that I didn't even know Lee Smith was teaching at UNC. I thought she lived in New York and she wrote a book. I mean, I have ADD, and I'm mildly dyslexic, so back then I didn't read covers, I didn't read forwards, I didn't read prologues because I thought they were like forwards. I mean, I limited what I had to read, and I stayed away from big books. So I had a big learning curve. I don't know how I got into UNC, to tell you the truth, but so that was huge for me, that she said, oh, we need to take her class. She teaches in the the evening college. So Lee was huge for me.
Mark, who do you think of as the people who are your forebears?
I don't know if he wants to be referred to as such, but for me it's actually Silas. I started writing, I had a very similar experience. I didn't start writing until I got out of college, and I was talking about with a couple of people before. I would write these stories on these long yellow legal notepads. I had an English degree, and I was working a series of minimum wage jobs. My dad always called my English degree pre-unemployment, and it was more or less playing out that way. And I remember when I wrote the first thing, I just knew I wanted to write, and I wrote something. I was writing about my family, essentially, and my wife read it, and she said, a lot of English majors go to law school, which wasn't necessarily a terribly encouraging thing. But I didn't know there was such a thing as Appalachian literature until I went to the Appalachian Writers Workshop in Hindman, Kentucky the first time. And it had never occurred to me that I could write about contemporary stuff about my own life. I thought everything had to be set 100 years ago or 50 years ago, back before there were automobiles or something. I guess until I read Clay's Quilt. That was the first book that I read. And then that introduced me to Harriet Arnoult and Reeves Smith and James Steele and all of the others.
I want to say one thing. I think all three of us were hugely influenced by the Appalachian Writers Workshop at Heinemann. And I mean, I first studied poetry with Robert Morgan, and he became a huge influence. And for those of you who are interested in writing, they have scholarships to the Appalachian Writers Workshop. And it's a wonderful place to go to learn your craft. It really is. And even if you're a beginner, it doesn't matter. You should go.
These three writers, because I know a little bit about each of their lives, they are each one an example of a kind of perverse perseverance. Each one has worked at other jobs, and I'll start with Mark, because this did not come up this morning. Mark graduated from the Citadel and did not become a soldier. Mark graduated from Yale Divinity School and did not become a preacher. That is a lot of education to be put to use somehow, and it ends up you decided to do the thing you really always wanted to do. And both of you have each of the two others of you have similar stories of how much trouble it was as a single mom for a while and as a mailman. And people love these little origin stories. You refused to fight or preach and decided you were going to write.
Yes.
Overcoming resistance, I think.
Are you not implying I'm like a failure at those others? Are you implying I failed at those?
No, I chose not to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's useful for a writer to be, and if they can't actually be, to at least feel there's something of an outsider, like they sit on the edge of cultures. I went to a military college with the intention of going into the military. My vision was terrible, and it was if there's ever been divine intervention in my life, it was the failure of my eyesight, because they wouldn't have me. I went to divinity school not knowing what I wanted to do, but it just kind of further reinforced the fact that what I wanted to do was just tell stories, just continue to do that. It was useful for me because I feel like sometimes in my life I have this simultaneous attraction and revulsion to authority, whatever it may be. Like I want to get close to it, but in the end I shrink back from it. I feel like it puts me in, I don't know, just always a little bit on the fringe, like the person sort of in the corner of the room. And I think that's good for a writer, that sense of not being fully comfortable with the world. I write, I don't know about y'all, but I write out of that. I don't write out of a place of certainty or comfort. I write out of confusion and discomfort.
Yeah, I like to learn.
Yeah.
Right. But interesting, everything that one learns, everything one learns at the Citadel, everything one learns at the Yale Divinity School, everything one learns being a human being goes into, finally, the novels. And Darnell, your story of becoming a writer is erratic as well.
Right. I made C's in composition. I mentioned that earlier. And my senior year, I was given an assignment to write a piece of fiction, and I came from a family of storytellers. And nobody had ever told me that a composition was a story, or an essay was a story. And so I got an A on that, and I thought, okay, that was easy. I love doing it. I think I want to do more of it. The problem was I was married my senior year in high school. I was pregnant as a cow, and when I wrote that story. And then I went on to have 2 children and live at the Marine Corps base at Camp Lejeune, and I actually started my education at a community college, just like you. And so I had a lot of obstacles, and I was just telling Mark, I wanted to write fiction. I had all these characters in my head. I had all these stories in my head. But one day I decided that my kids were going to grow up and be gone, and I needed to pay attention to them, and the writing, I would have the rest of my life to write. And so my first novel was published a little while after I was a grandmother. And that's okay with me. But in the meantime, I cleaned houses. I worked as a chairside dental assistant. I've been a secretary. I've had some really bizarre jobs so that I could be a flexible single parent. And I too was going to go to law school, but my husband and I got divorced and never went to law school. And I went back to finish my undergraduate degree at UNC. I had to drop out when I got divorced. I went back. finished. Fortunately, I've had Lee Smith as a friend all those years when I wasn't in school, and she kept encouraging me. And my master's, I got that late, and I got an MFA at University of Memphis about 10 years ago because I wanted to teach at the college level and get health insurance. And so I've taken a very non-traditional path toward all this. But all those experiences have given me stories. And a lot of times I'll tell students, English majors, that's a great major. It teaches you how to express yourself. You can always use that in the future. But being a social worker, being a lawyer, being a doctor, William Carlos Williams was a doctor, Chekhov was a doctor. Get a career that puts you in front of stories. Because that's where your material is going to be. And I was fortunate. I collected all that material all the time, and then when my kids went away to school, it helped soothe that separation by writing.
And Silas, I remember years ago when your first book was coming out, you told a wonderful story about being in the Postal Service. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone here was here then for that. I know it was a long time ago.
I don't know which story it was.
You're riding along delivering rural mail and writing a novel.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was a mail carrier for almost 8 years. It's probably the best thing I did for myself as a writer because I really just understood human beings in a whole new way. I understood nature in a whole new way. I was out in the elements, So yeah, I was the first person in my family to go to college, so I didn't know anything about how to do that, but I was just determined to go to college. And then when I graduated, I went straight into being a mail carrier and didn't really use my degree. So I waited about 8 years between my undergrad until I went back to school and got my MFA. And in that time, I had 2 kids at a young age, so I had to do whatever I had to do to support my family. So I worked as a mail carrier, worked at Walmart, Lowe's, poured concrete, installed satellite dishes. If you want to meet some good characters, that's the way to do it.
Are you telling me that it's not true that you had a notepad in the car with you in delivering the mail?
Right, I did. There's just so many stories from carrying the mail that I don't know which one in particular I told back then.
Well, just that you were driving with one hand and writing on a pad with the other hand.
Yeah, back then I smoked, so I was driving from the wrong side of the car. I drove this Thunderbird on the mail route, so my leg is over the console. I'm driving, smoking, eating, putting mail in the mailbox, and taking notes. Yeah. And that's how I wrote my first book.
So you can write anywhere, and there are stories everywhere. Stories. If we all got out a 3x5 card and we wrote on the 3x5 card, what is the subject matter of Appalachian literature? Traditionally, it would be log cabins and moonshine. It would be dog patch. And occasionally with Lee Smith, it's a flatlander who like oral history, very, very fine novel. A person who's not a mountain person who finds himself or herself in this culture. It would be grits and a rough life. But you three are this generation of Appalachian literature, and the subject matter in all of your work is absolutely contemporary. Silas, in the plays especially, the controversies, the issues that are going on in small town mountain South are brand new issues. Yeah, going on everywhere, especially the plays about hate crime and what have you.
Right. I don't know what it is about Kentucky in particular, but Kentucky writers often take on social. There's a long tradition of Wendell Berry, Barbara Kingsolver, Frank X. Walker. There's just a tradition of really having to take up that mantle of social justice. I think it's because we're such a screwed up state, where we're just fighting for our survival that we take on those issues somehow. So my first 3 books I think of as sort of like a family trilogy. And then my next three books I think of as sort of social justice books. Eli the Good's a lot about war, patriotism, protest. Same Son Here is a lot about immigration and environmental issues. And then Southernmost is a lot about equality issues, especially. So I don't know why. I don't set out to do that. I don't set out to have an agenda. It's just that rises up out of the characters, I think.
Right. And Mark, the two novels, the two most recent novels, they're Southern for sure. They're Appalachian in a sense, but they're also about Iraq, Afghanistan, Abu Ghraib, CIA, Black Ops. They're not. They're not barefoot folk making corn liquor in a holler somewhere. They're the issues that are American and global.
Right, and I would write the barefoot if I could, I guess. But yeah, there's this. Often, I think people think about Appalachia or think about anywhere in the South, especially small towns, and they think they're these little insular, closed-off communities that the larger world don't they never pierce it. And I just found that to be completely false. If anything, especially with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, I found small southern towns where men and women have returned to be more influenced by the larger push of the world, right? And there's the thing that I always think that what makes the South in general and Appalachia so interesting is the way what's new is colliding against what's old. So I have my grandmother who's she's quite old. She's like 87 years old, and she is your consummate old Appalachian granny woman, but she's on Facebook, and she tweets and she does these things, and it's just hilarious because all of the spats she would have at her church are now played out on Facebook, and it's wonderful to see. I just think that sort of thing's fascinating, the way these things run together. Much more fascinating to me than the idea of some kind of homogenous culture where everyone's eating biscuits on the porch.
Electricity has changed you folks forever.
That's right. Don, that reminds me of the Briar Sermon by Jim Wayne Miller. It's sort of like the defining poem of the Appalachian experience. And he says in there, we don't have to think ridge to ridge, we can think ocean to ocean. So to me, that's about being a modern Appalachian is about being, paying attention to the local, but you also have to be global to be a modern person.
Darnell, what's the subject matter in your fiction and poetry that clearly rooted there and yet is global?
Well, I think for me, Crystal Wilkinson has said that she doesn't think of herself as much as an African-American writer as a rural woman writer. And I think women, especially, are constantly having to reinvent themselves and recognize what they have and learn to use it. And I think a lot of my work is about recognition and reinvention and how you create your own mythology as an individual. I vote, I'm very politically minded personally, but I don't think about politics. And I'm not saying that y'all start with an agenda, but politics definitely has a huge influence on your work. And for me, it's a different kind of energy than that political energy. It's really about personal politics, personal overcoming of certain obstacles, and how you get to a goal despite everything that's put in your path.
Something that we three have talked about in other contexts. The image of Appalachia is white. That you can go 1,000 miles from Maine to Albertville, and there are no black people. Of course, this is not true. And now there is a burgeoning black poetry movement in Appalachia. And I think all of you are familiar with it.
The Appalachian.
Yeah, Afro-Latins. And who are they and what are they doing? And what's that about?
Well, Crystal Wilkinson certainly is part of that movement. Frank X. Walker was one of the founders of that. He started that phrase, I mean. Who else?
Nikki Giovanni.
What is the burden of their message? Why is this Why does this movement exist? What's the point of it, Silas?
That there is diversity in the region. I mean, there are also Appalachians, which are Appalachian people who are mixed Asian descent. One of my best friends is Mike Crowley. He has a book coming out about the Appalachian experience of being, his mother's Korean, his father's Appalachian. There's the Appalachians, which are, Latino, people of Latino descent who have settled in the region. So Appalachia is diversified.
James Applewhite refers to everybody as the Afro-American.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's Fabulachans, which are gay Appalachians, too, because they're gay people there, too. So it's not just straight white.
Fab?
Huh?
What did you say? You say fab?
Fabulachans.
Fabulous.
Like fabulous Appalachians. Yeah.
All right.
There are all kinds of, yeah.
Well, of course there are. But they were invisible until all recent memory, our lifetime.
The literature is usually what's revealing, Appalachians. It's revealing that it is a more diverse place.
I mean, a lot of these people came in either through work in the mines or the mills. A lot of people were brought in even against their will to work in certain parts of Appalachia, and then they settled out there. And so a lot of the voices that are now emerging from Appalachia, it's also part of this larger movement for Appalachia to define itself for the larger world, because the outside world wants to say that we're all dumb and fat and, don't have good sense and don't have good teeth.
Addicted to opioids.
I've always thought of Appalachian not as dumb and fat, but as mildly paranoid.
Not so much.
About being accused of being dumb and fat. It's what I mean.
I mean, you need to talk to Diane Sawyer, then you'll understand why we're paranoid.
Mark, what do you see as the diversity we didn't know was there?
Right, so the town in which I grew up had a huge textile mill until it was called Piedmont Quilting. It closed in the late 80s, and it was staffed almost exclusively. Folks were recruited from Honduras and Mexico and El Salvador, and when it finally closed, they stayed. And I would say 40% of my hometown, which otherwise would be viewed as like a lily white southern town, is not.
And I graduated from George Washington Carver High School.
Right.
And I grew up in a sundown town that is now very diverse. In 25 years' time, that totally changed.
Way back, 70, 75, 78, there was a collection of books came out that suggested it was we had the election, we'd had Lyndon Johnson from Texas, then we got Jimmy Carter, Southerner, and there was a spate of books. The title of one was The Americanization of Dixie, the Southernization of America. Silas this morning talked about how the South is not behind or corrupt. It is a mirror of the whole country. As a hypothesis, instead of suggesting that the South is more and more like the North, what about the possibility that the country is more like the South as we have traditionally understood it? It's the Southernization of America as well as the Americanization of Dixie. Maybe we're less different. Maybe the South is less different from the North because the North is now revealing itself. And I think Silas would agree, at least in part here. The North is now revealing itself as much more like the South that we used to worry about. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I think the South is everything that the rest of America fears, and we're also everything they want to be. There's this romanticizing that goes on, and there's this vilifying that goes on. So it's like as much as they'll talk about, people will tell me, well, things must be so simple where you're from. Everybody must get along. Y'all sit on the porch together and get together and play music and all that. But at the same time, they think we're all incestuous and going to kill each other. It contradicts, those notions contradict each other.
The other thing is we have a good time. There is some element of truth in it.
Sure.
people that worked in the coal mines and worked in the mills, we didn't need an arts council to come and tell us that we should incorporate art into our lives. People worked a really hard day to make a living, and they went home and they did make music, and they did make a little shine. And they, either because they needed the money to pay the rent or because it was cheaper to make your own. And there is a lot of resourcefulness. And then out of that, we have stock car racing and country music, and that is, the whole country loves stock car racing and country music, so there is that influence. But I do think that we have always, and this is not, just the South, but I think we are known for art emerging from hardship and strong voices and activism. All that has always been present.
Yeah. To go back to Lee Smith, my favorite thing ever description of the South is Lee Smith wrote, in the South, we'll make you a casserole, but we'll kill you.
Yeah.
Mark.
If you need, kill him.
But some do.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm the only member of my family, of any of my siblings, and my wife, this is the same is true for my wife, that don't live within just a couple of miles of where our parents lived. So all of my siblings are on this fairly contiguous line of land that has been populated by my family for a long, long time. And there's a part of me that just finds that so claustrophobic that I need some distance from it. But there's also this kind of authenticity that comes out of it too. And I think that's maybe what sometimes gets romanticized, that they know everyone. And I know most everyone there too, but they know these people deeply, right? It's my siblings are all successful in their careers, and they've lived in other places, and they've come back, and they're sort of mystified why anybody would want to live anywhere but right there, which is kind of limiting, but it's kind of beautiful too, to be, why not be that happy and content where you are with your family?
I envy that.
Yeah, no, I envy it all the time.
During the many years I taught at Gadsden at the Extension Center, my students, who were almost all high school teachers and junior college teachers, and housewives, one of the things, among many of anecdotes, the first thing in the morning, they'd get on the phone and call their mothers and ask what their mother was feeding their father for breakfast. And they didn't need to ask, because they lived within 50 yards or so, and they could probably have looked over and seen, but there was no moving away. And Silas, your play, The Hurtin' Part, is about Appalachian folk who make the attempt to move to Ohio and can't bring it off because it's just too hard.
Yeah.
And your folks, Mark, your family have returned to the place. Are you homing pigeons? Are you what is the why don't you live in Seattle or Miami? Why can't you do that? You could if you wanted to, of course, but what's it about? Silas? I've written directly about it.
Well, I live about 45 minutes from where I grew up. Only 45 minutes, but every day I'm terribly homesick. I miss that landscape. I miss the dialect. That's the thing. There are many Appalachians from county to county, or even, holler to holler. There's different languages and different foodways and all that. So, I don't know, it's just a sense of place that gets in your bones that you just can't get rid of. I don't know if that answers that question. But.
We have an audience here of people who are thinking about whether they're going to move to Atlanta or not. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to get the hell out of Henry County and go to New York or someplace. I didn't have any intentions of staying where I was when I was young. And getting pregnant and getting married kind of put a little quietus on that part. But I had college on my horizon, and I never let it slip off. But then I find myself in Cumberland Gap. I moved to Smith County, Tennessee, which is a very rural county. And I had lived and worked in Durham and Chapel Hill for almost 20 years. And I told Michael Chitwood, who's another wonderful Appalachian writer, that I was tired of my bullshit meter being in the red zone by 9 o'clock in the morning every day. And I know, sorry about that, I felt like a sailor, but I mean, when you live in a town that is loaded with universities, a lot of people only think in theory. They have all these theories about how society should be, and they look around and see themselves in every direction. And if you don't get out of that town and see the other people, you have this tendency to think, well, everybody must think like me.
They're more provincial than anybody.
Exactly. And I didn't want to write about those people. I wanted to write about the people I'd come from. And so when I remarried 20 years after my divorce, I finally found somebody that had me. I moved back to that rural community, and I was glad to be there because I looked around and recognized those people. Now, the problem there is that when they see me, they see somebody who's lived in Chapel Hill and Durham for 20 years. And so it takes a while for them not to see you as an outsider. Because we are very protective of community for a good reason. And so you have to reintegrate yourself and kind of gain people's trust because they think you're,
That you haven't picked up nasty ways in the big city.
Yeah.
Mark,
you're
very near your home place.
I am, and I've made apparently my hobby as an adult is to move away and move back because I've done it about 5 times. And I've inadvertently written the same book over and over. And I don't ever mean to write this, but it's always about somebody leaving or somebody returning right in the end back to the place. Right. And I know you said homing pigeons, and I guess it is some inborn intuitive thing, but I very much always, like Silas said, homesick for somewhere that's right around the corner. I know that feeling very well. When I left to live in the Northeast, my mom, with great concern, said, "Don't you let them ruin you." And there is that sense of like distrust a little bit, like people look at me a little aslant when I'm at home because I haven't been there the whole time. I've lived in other places.
And I've never left the region, and even though I didn't change the way I talk, I changed what I talk about. And so that makes you just as suspect as if you change your way of speaking, if you change what you talk about. So, among my cousins, when I go down home, I'm an outsider to some degree because I'm not just talking. I can talk about hunting and fishing and pocket knives and dogs and all that, but I also want to talk about literature and film and politics and et cetera. So that makes me a little bit, I'm suspect in my own culture.
Well, Harry Crews has talked about, when a photographer puts a camera up to their face and takes pictures of what they've come from, you can't just then put the camera down and step back over into that territory again. You've drawn a kind of permanent line. You can walk over there, but you've separated yourself. Yeah. And you know it, and everybody else.
And you have to be that. You have to be an outsider to some degree to write about a place.
We have to be an observer. Yeah. You can't observe and participate at the same time.
So the process of leaving and then coming back with fresh eyes yields more art than if you just stayed enmeshed in it, immersed in it from start to finish.
Either that or that you suddenly come to this moment of recognition, which I think is what you're talking about. You recognize who you really are, and you have to be true to who that is. And that's almost the same as stepping away.
Well, I know there are questions. For sure, I know a couple of them for sure. And I know there are others of you who are generating a question for anybody or everybody. We're ready. Yes, sir.
I talked to Mark out in the lobby, and I'm only as smart as the last segment I heard on National Public Radio, but this discussion was a little kerfluffle between J.D. Vance, who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, and a woman, I think her name is Kat, and it's been on National Public Radio from Appalachian. She has a different perspective. So this discussion between Kat, y'all know her name? And J.D. Vance of Hillbilly Elegy. And the upshot being, how does West Virginia vote for Donald Trump? And specifically, Reeves Smith, how pro I've read him a lot in Oxford American. I know he's into politics, so. But just that. One thing I want to say, you mentioned demarcation. President Carter was elected, looking at the South, he speaks in Esquire in 76, Larry King. We ain't trash no more. So I thought that was pretty good.
Exactly.
But J.D. Vance in that discussion.
How are we liking J.D. Vance, Darnell?
I was just gonna say, I didn't finish it, I didn't get through it. It just strikes me as someone who benefited from all of these American institutions, and the tone of that book stressed me as someone who just wants to tear down those institutions. My take is negative.
Well, the problem I have with that book is he's not from Appalachia, and he was telling a story about all the sensational stories that had been handed down in his family. Well, when you write fiction, you don't tell happy stories because nobody wants to read a happy story from 300 pages. So the stories that survive are the ones that are a little outlandish, or there's danger or violence associated with them. And so he had this element of his family history, and those stories were being polished before he was seasoned, but his parents were middle-class people who moved away, he wasn't raised in the region, and he wrote that book, okay, fine. But then what makes me so aggravated is, the media then made him the spokesperson for Appalachian why Trump was elected. And he doesn't know why Trump was elected. People
were desperate to know why, and he provided an answer. And sold them books.
He told people that they would get their jobs back. And everybody thinks that we, in Appalachia, want to be on the go. Most people in Appalachia want to work, and their opportunity for work is taken away. And yes, there's a portion of the region that likes the rebel flags, and they somehow they've gotten licensed to say things that before this presidency someone might have thought twice about. But I really believe it's the need for a job that causes people to sort of shut out some of the things he says because they want to work. And somebody from Appalachia, like Silas or Mark, or Robert Guy, who's written his second book is about to come out now, fabulous book on, the problems intrinsic in the region. They should be the ones talking about why what we do.
Silas?
I have two main problems with the book. The one that people rarely talk about is it's so bad. It is just not well written. The sentences are terrible. It's not researched. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't have historical and cultural context, and he thinks he does. He's the classic example of somebody who thinks they know everything about culture and don't know, but he doesn't understand it at all. I could go on and on. I don't read it. And I had read the cat yet I had it. So I'm anxious to read it.
There will be rebuttals. They have begun. There will be responses to J.D. Vance, even if he becomes the senator from Ohio, which might.
Did that work for a
Other questions? Yes. Go ahead.
This is for Ms. Darnell. Is there a certain point in that point of my life right then you're right?
Yeah, it was sitting in that high school classroom. And I mentioned that, I finally got to college and I finally got to take a fiction class. And actually, a good friend of mine, Tom Rankin, he was in a folklore program and I was working on my undergraduate degree. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a writer. And he said, well, have you written anything? And I said, no. And he said, don't you think you ought to write something? And I said, yeah. And I signed up for this class that I got kicked out of. And when I talked to this friend and pulled out the book Black Knight Breakdown, and she told me we were teaching at evening college, I signed up for that class, and I was very nervous about turning in my first assignment to her because I figured I would get kicked out of that class. And what happened was, she was given back the papers, and she said, okay, this is the best one, and it doesn't have a name on it, and she started reading it, and it was mine. And I understood then that I had been so willing to give my power away, and let somebody else tell me what I could and couldn't do. And the sad thing is, I did the same thing about 30 years later for a little while. But I learned, you know, that I had not researched that the writer that I was taking the class with. He was a poet, he was from the Northeast. He didn't appreciate the voice I was writing in. And Lee recognized it. She understood it, she knew where I was coming from. And so it matters who you get as a teacher, if you go that route. And so I think it's important to think about who your teachers are and where they're coming from. I have friends who have gone to graduate school, and professors have said, you know, nobody talks like this. This is corn time. Nobody talks like this anymore. And they would say, something daylight Virginia is sitting the rest of you listen. And that goes back to what I said about everybody in a big college town thinks that everybody talks like that.
If you have the right accent, though, you can be the moderator. Any other questions? Here? Yes.
If any of you could tell your young writing self anything, what would it be?
I think I would tell my younger writing self just to be more patient. I was so, I started writing when I was about 21, and I was so determined to publish as fast as possible. I just felt like it was some kind of validation that I badly wanted. And I wish now I could just tell that self to relax, you know, that in the end it's about the quality of the work and not that feeling of yes. Because there's some other goal, right? After you publish a book, you want to, whatever, right? You know, sell more books or something. There's always something else. So I wish I could calm down myself, easier on myself.
I would say keep a notebook. I'm always enough about things that I wish I remembered. And I wish I had taken, not a journal where I say diary, but, you know, like bullets or, you know, images or something I heard somebody say. I wish I had kept those kinds of journals all along.
I would say characterization is more important than plot. I spent a lot of time worrying about plot. And then I understood finally that if I created characters, the plot will rise.
Yes.
I just have a question for everybody. It's a question I like to ask people. What are you reading right now?
What are you reading right now?
We were talking about this earlier. I am late to the party, but I'm reading the Alina Ferrante, the Neapolitan novels. Do you know this? It's Italian writer. It's something that I thought I would never like, and now I am completely addicted to them and reading through them as fast as possible.
I just went through a spell of a few years where I didn't have time to read or write, and so I've gone back to my early influences. So right now I'm reading Wealthy stories.
I go to the phase where I was reading one kind of literature, so I've been really stuck on literature from Ireland, Scotland, and England. So I'm reading right now a memoir called Powell, set in Scotland. But the last book that I read, I just, you know, keep thinking about that one for everybody reads called The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. It's the best book I've read in a long time about sort of this Loch Ness monster takes over this part of England in the 1860s. Of course, there is no monster, but it's about how it impacts all people in the community.
Yes, go ahead.
This is to Ms. Darnell. Is there another novel you were working on? Your last two publications were poetry.
Yes, thank you for asking. I'm working on a novel about the people that used to work in Carnival and they settled out of this town and built an amusement park. Thank you.
Yes.
How much of your own personal lives, like particularly you all put it into your work, and are there any particular characters?
How does one's personal life get used in the work?
Too much for me.
Get used.
I mean, I feel like every character I write is some version of me, and we were talking about this last night. Some of us I'm writing a novel right now that's about my hometown and about my family, and it's almost like a memoir. I'm just struggling to disguise people so that they won't get into my relationship with all of them. So to me, I draw heavily on my own life to a fault, and then I wind up having to go back and somehow make it a little different.
I think some of my stories are, that 20/80 rule. I think some of my stories are 20% true, and some of them are 80% true. And it's the part that's not true that makes it work. Because otherwise it's just too negative. But there's a place in there where there's a part of everything. And people have asked that question before, and in the novel, the person that I most identify with was the little black boy who goes to live with his grandmother adoption. Because I had to go live with my grandmother. And that changed my life. So there's so many fragile things about you and the way you are in story. Even if it's largely true, it's no longer true.
Yeah. Every one of my books are totally made up, none of that really happened, but each one of them is telling an essential truth about my life, I think about the essential truth and how I want to tell that in each book, because to me it has to have a theme of everything's radiating out from and reporting on that truth. So what I like a piece of me is in every character. Every character's name to some degree.
It has to be in a way where you like it.
Well, we've ended on the subject of truth. That's a good place to stop. I think we don't mind. I had a question. Who are you? Go ahead. Alabama as a state is identified with the Old South and plantation image, but our area is Appalachian, but I think it's sometimes hard for us to see it because of the identity of the state as a whole. I know y'all are here for only a short time, but what are your observations about how Appalachian this area is?
This is like home to me. It feels a lot like Western Kentucky. The way people interact, just the way people are with each other, the hospitality, the culture is very similar. To me, it feels a lot like home. So it feels very Appalachian to me.
Well, I come from Virginia. Virginia sort of has the same kind of southern reputation, Civil War, all that. And the county that I grew up in, Union County, initially did not become a member of the ARC because it was an industrial complex at that time. And they didn't want to be identified with poverty and lack of education. Now that the opiate crisis and the loss of jobs has created a different culture that's become part of our ARC because they want that money. But so I think for me, what I see is that the different cultures are just woven together. Like even the drive to where we're staying, there were a lot of trailers, there were some double wides, but there were also these nice houses and, corner stores that had died and corner stores that were still thriving, and all that felt very familiar to me.
There's a kindness here that I associate with where I'm from. It doesn't exist everywhere. Just talking to so many people out there, just good, decent people. I spent 8 years in Florida. I think of it as like I did 8 years time in Florida. And when my wife and I moved back, we had forgotten that people are friendly. Because it's not anything personal with where we live. It's just like, what do you want? What do you need? Like, oh, no, that's right. People are nice. And I feel that same thing here.
Well, people are friendly and nice to you three because you three are friendly and nice. Thank them for their wonderful time. Thank you.